Welcome back to another episode of Space for Life. It's been a few episodes since I've been able to be on with you, Tommy, but I'm excited to be back.
Oh man, it's good to be back together. We've had. I feel like I've had some wild episodes here recently. To share with some amazing guests, but it's always good to be back with you.
I've loved the past episodes, but I'm really excited about this one because honestly, selfishly, it hits home for me. I am right about to start my 30s decade in a month or so. And so you and I were talking about what does it look like to age well in your 30s? And I think that it's such an interesting topic because, yes, to some degree in your 20s, but more so than a lot of decades, your 30s are a blank slate. It looks so different. A lot of people have multiple kids. A lot of people are not married yet. A lot of people are focused on their career or travel or so much else. And the more and more I've been thinking about it, so many people come in with emphatic advice of this is what you should be doing. But my wife and I were even talking this weekend, and you can't do everything that everyone says, right? Like it's so many trade-offs. There's, you in the past have talked about like the work-life balance and how you've pushed back on it and say it's more like a work-life dance. Yeah. And I feel like the 30s are like that. It's this tension management between what's the life that I'm trying to build in the future versus the life that I'm living now. All of these tension points.
Yeah, it's really true. And I think that when people talk about, a decade, particularly after, they're long past that decade, the tendency is to think about all the things that you have to do to get your act together so that by the time you reach my age, you'll have done it well. And I think that's actually a really big miss. Every day we should be living well, and we should be enjoying every day, and we should be able to live with a sense of freedom. So to me, this thing of aging well, it's a great topic. I think it's worth talking about for every single decade, if not year, that we enter into. But at the same time, we don't want to be thinking about that to the exclusion of living our lives right now. And, you're at a phenomenal phase of life. And how terrible would it be if you kind of lived it with the burden of, I have to get my act together so that, 30 years from now, I can have a good life, So I hope that our discussion, the things that we talk about will actually be freeing you to live your best life now and also plant the right seeds for your best life in the next decades.
Well, I really appreciate that perspective because I feel like when people talk about living well, so much of it is actually an absence of freedom and trying to build everything for the future, which I think people have the intent of, well, that's going to unlock more freedom in the future. But one pushback that I've always had on it is like take savings or anything else. It's like you focus so much on doing that. And then we think that this switch just flips in 30 years and all of a sudden I'm living into this freedom when actually what's happened is it's become almost a chain or a lack of freedom and I'm doing everything in service of that.
Yeah, it is absolutely true. If we get so locked in that we feel like, we've got to make the most of every moment and we've got to, plan ourselves and be so on top of everything, then we lose all the joy in life. And so I hope that there's the possibility of kind of having our cake and eat it too. That, we can maybe, if we plant just a few things in the right place, that will actually free us up to let the rest of the space be for just pure joy and fun and living well.
That's my hope too with this. And I maybe I'll change my view on it after the episode or during it even, but I've kind of felt like there are maybe just a very few ways that are quote unquote wrong. And I don't even know if they're as wrong as we think they are, but yet we've made so much in the middle black and white of this is the way you should do it or this is the way you should it. And I think that middle area, there should be way more freedom. But I wonder if we look too much for what's the quote unquote right way of doing it.
Well, exactly. And, there is we've talked about it with a lot of different subjects. There is no perfection in this. Mm-hmm. So, we want to try to get it right in a few spots. And if anything, I'd like to, err on the side of freedom. I mean, you just got back from an incredible skiing trip with friends, bachelor, week or weekend type of experience. How terrible would it be if the thought of, trying to prepare well for the future precluded, incredible experiences like that? I mean, I think that would be terrible if you came out of a discussion like this with a burden.
Right.
So I hope we won't go that direction.
Well, knowing your personality, I don't think that it will. But at the same time, you have lived this decade and you've built a life that I respect a lot. And so it's an opportunity for me to pick your brain of what are the things that you're glad you did? What are the things you wish you had done different? And not that it's a black and white have to be this way, but it is wisdom and I would be foolish to ignore it.
Well, at the same time, I'm a whole lot of years removed from 30 years old. I mean, a whole lot. So I'm counting on you to push back and go, I think you've forgotten what it's like to be 30 if I get into that rut. So we'll go at it together to try to figure out the right balance.
Well, I'm excited about it. I guess jumping in from there, I think when I mentioned in the beginning, the tensions of your 30s, and I think it's just worth calling out that everything's this give and take between now and the future. And I think that this is a decade you start to feel that even more. Whereas I don't want to make too many generalizations, but it's a little bit easier in your 20s to live for just now. And later on, you start feeling pressure more of later in life. And so it is a decade where it feels like both forces are colliding. So there's that tension. And then I think it's easy for us to think about the preparation just in terms of financially and savings and career building. Right. But there's the tension of relationally, experientially, financially, all of these different things are in play.
So one of the things I would say on the front end is that, we kind of like to operate at nice even numbers. And so we think of the decades of, the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s. Maybe this is real artificial, but I almost think working in the half decades is better. That is, I think a whole lot of formative stuff happens from 25 to 35. And then you think about 35 to 45, 45 to 55, and then, it almost feels like things fit better. So I know for me, and it seems like a lot of people, in your age, that 25 to 35 is such a formative time where you're, so much is happening. And I think a big piece of that is that it's the decade from that 25 to 35 where, you're trying to figure a lot of things out. It's not just figuring out balances that what's good on one side and what's bad on the other side. It's trying to just figure life out to begin with. So anyway, I think when I think of what we're talking about, I think of almost 25 to 35 as that kind of critical decade that a lot can happen for good, or we can get a little bit off track.
I think that's actually spot on, being, I guess, dead center of that range that you were talking about there. These are definitely questions that I've been thinking for the last few years and are kind of, in some ways, I think growing the next 5 for me, but I think that can vary a lot based off of every person.
Sure. Everybody is going to be at different places along the journey. So, in this rough, from 25 to 35 to 40, a lot is happening, and people in that are probably asking a lot of questions and trying to figure a lot of things out.
Well, given all of this, where my mind was jumping, if we kind of we've teed up this topic, I think it's going to be valuable for a lot of people, and I think that if you're interested at this point. Now your question is, okay, so what do I do? How do I navigate all of this going on? And where my mind first goes is if there's so much gray area of what it could look like, but also I do want to be mindful. I want to have freedom, and I want to try to live it well. A logical conclusion for me is that it can look very different for different people. Yep. But that then begs the question, it's so easy, I think, to compare with others. They're doing it this way. Is that right? Should I be doing it more here? Am I falling behind in this area? Yeah. And we are almost artificially make it this race, and we're trying to figure out, are we in a right place because of that? And so you've got this comparison versus trying to, one, know and then have confidence with what is right for you. And I think that question is a little bit at the crux of this discussion. Is like, how do you know what's right for you? How do you know what to value more? And then how do you have confidence in that?
Yeah. And I do think it's a great starting point on this, because I think that one of the pitfalls of operating, kind of in these years that you're in, is operating impulsively. That is going off of the feeling at the moment of what I should do. So you take this ski trip that we're talking about. If you are operating in the moment, at one moment you might go, oh, I absolutely just can't afford to do that. That's so wasteful for me to do that. And I'm just going to say no to that opportunity. Or you might come at that 10 minutes later and go, oh my gosh, these are my friends for life. This is the most important thing for me to do. I have to do this. But both decisions, which could come out on completely opposite ends of the spectrum, are just made based on the feeling that you have at the moment. And I think that that's kind of that place that a lot of people in their 20s and 30s are operating from. They're operating based on, how do I feel right now, based on what's going on in my life right now, without any really premeditation behind it, I guess is what I would say. And if I were to say a great starting point is to kind of have some time to premeditatedly think about what really does matter to me. And when I talk about that in the grand scheme of trying to live life well, I talk about that in the form of guiding principles. And guiding principles is coming to some absolute clarity points of what really does matter to me. And if we think about it in the terms of if you were building a house, one of the places that you've got to start with is you've got to lay a good foundation. And if you don't lay a good foundation, then all the other things that you do, which might look great, from the outside, could crumble at some point. And so I think that one of the most important things, which really just takes a small amount of concentrated time, one of the most important things is going through the exercise to say what really matters to me in life. And if you can get that right, and if you then make your decisions in sync with that, you can't go but so wrong with things. That's we need to kind of delve into that a little bit more, but does that make sense?
It does make sense, but to me, I think it raises this question of how do you, if I prioritize and I really think, I'm like, okay, relationships, let's say, are paramount to me. And I'm saying that's really what's I think is going to matter. And yes, I want to advance my career and whatever, but I'd rather invest in relationships. And that's, I guess, this hierarchy I'm building, but it's not like all versus nothing, if that makes sense. And so then, like, if I can't just say yes, say to every single trip that ever comes up because I say relationships are more important than career, because it's like relationships to an extent are what I want to invest in more.
Right.
But also I understand that if I ignore this completely, that'll sabotage these other areas. You see what I mean? So like, I think that's where it gets confusing to me, is that it's not a clear priority of like, do this box and then you can go to this box. It's like they're overlapping. And then what do you do when it's overlapping?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there are a couple of things that I think can help along that lines. One, there are lots of things that matter to us, and we have to acknowledge that, on the front end. There's not it as much as we'd love to say there's just one thing that matters. Our lives are a lot more complex than that. So there are many things that matter. What I love to encourage people to do is to try to get kind of a top 5. Here are the top 5 things that matter to me. And in doing that, I'm not talking about values like, well, honesty matters to me type of thing. I mean, that could be one, but I'm really thinking around the broad spectrum of things like relationships that you're talking about. So the first piece is to try to get, what are 5 things that matter to you a lot? Now, hopefully, in going through that exercise, you'd end up at a place where you had to say, there are other things that matter to me also, but not as much. Okay. So let's say you get it down to 5. Then I think a really good step from there is to do the best you can to prioritize these and say, well, I am acknowledging that in my life, relationships are more important than finances. Now, I think we got to go further than that, but let's just say that was kind of a conclusion to it. So right there, you now have a little bit of a hierarchy, a litmus test for things that come your way to make a decision on them. Okay. So the third thing I would say is I always try to, I will say for myself, I have tried to create some tension in those things that matter. So one of the tensions, for instance, that I have in one of my guiding principles is I want to live a life of purpose with margin. All right. The idea behind that is living a life of purpose is really important to me. It's why I'm doing the things that, like this podcast. All right. So, but I also know that I am wired to put too much on the plate. All right. I do that all the time. And when something looks good, more of it looks even better. And I could run myself into the ground living a life of purpose. So I realize that I have to create a little bit of a tension point in that. And that's purpose with margin. So let me use just an example from my life of where this kind of comes into play. So, I've talked ad nauseum about this principle in my life of living a life of purpose with margin. This is how it worked out for me. There was years ago, this was probably now 10, 12 years ago, I was asked to be an elder, or brought up, nominated to be an elder at church. And I came to the point of thinking it through, of this decision. And, being an elder in church kind of fits so much of what I feel like my purpose in life is to be. But when I looked at the decision, I came to the conclusion that there was no way I could say yes to that without overloading my life. That as much as I kind of wanted to do it on the surface, if I said yes, I was going to be paying the price for the 3 years while I tried to fulfill all of the duties of it. So I ended up saying no to it because it violated the principle that I was crystal clear on in my mind of live a life of purpose with margin, or not at the expense of margin is the way I think about it. It was only a matter of a few months later that another opportunity came up to head up a mentoring ministry at the church that fit that much more that I could say yes to without violating the margin. So it was the no that came completely as a result of being clear on that guiding principle that enabled the best yes just a little bit later. So for you, you've got a value. Let's just take it at face value. You said a value of relationships are really important to you. What's that balancing thing? Relationships, but not at the expense of ...
Right.
Okay. I don't know exactly what the answer is, but if you can find that tension point, now when that opportunity comes along, you don't just dive at the relationships and throw all else to the wind. You've got a checkpoint on it. And I think that is, for me, that's been really, really helpful to have those checkpoints.
So I totally see that, and I appreciate it. I think in some ways that it does make it harder and more helpful at the same time.
Yes, it does make it harder.
But that's like a binary tension. I guess let me throw in an example of, let's say that the top 3 priorities are relationships, then experiences, then financial security. Let's say in this scenario, those are the 3. And there's 2 trip opportunities coming up. One is with this group of friends that's this relational investment, and it's an experience, but let's say that it cost $20,000 to do it. It's not sabotaging or causing to go into debt, but it's depleting savings. There's this other scenario that is maybe still relational, and it's an experience, but it's $5,000 on the trip. Okay. And so both these scenarios, to some degree, hold tension, all 3 of those priorities. On surface level, it's like, if relationships are number 1, shouldn't you do that trip that invests in more? But then you look at it and you're like, well, it's 4 times as much and it hurts the financial security more. And so then how do you begin to navigate scenarios like that where it's 3 conflicting priorities? Nothing's right or wrong with it.
Yeah. Well, I think you stated it well from the perspective of it's not a question of right or wrong. But I think if you go into the decision process with clarity about where those 3 align, that is, let's just say for the sake of our example, you've said relationships are more important than experiences, and experiences are more important than finances. Let's just say you've done that. You now have a little bit of a clarity of this hierarchy, but you're wanting to operate in such a way that you can make decisions that honor all 3. And that if you are being asked to make a decision that clearly violates one, then, okay, I have to take that into consideration. So it doesn't answer all of these questions by any means, but it gives you, I guess, a framework to find the nuance on decisions instead of on the other side. And this is what we're really trying to do, is just operate impulsively. I really want to, so I'm going to do it. I'll live with the consequences later.
How do you then navigate that? Not flippant, but a little bit of just kind of living free and being intentional.
Well, first of all, just knowing you, I do think you operate with a high degree of intentionality. So you're already kind of doing really well on this thought process. I would say, if I were to tweak kind of what you're talking about, I'd say the one thing that you may not have as well as you would like to, as well as would be helpful for you, is the absolute clarity as to exactly what is important and how these things rank. And the more you can get to that, the more you're not grinding over the decisions. But if you're a little bit fuzzy in your mind, then each time those decisions come up about, should I do this? Should I do? You're reinventing the wheel. Now, kind of intuitively what matters to you and things that don't matter to you. So you get a little bit of a head start, but you're actually just making it a lot harder because I'm having to start again from scratch and say, well, this is expensive. Well, when do I do this? What's really, you're kind of doing what we're talking about, but you're starting from zero every time. And that just exhausts everybody along the way. So I think what I would say in a sense is if you can operate and say, yes, that this decision is not violating any of my top 5 things that matter most, then fly free, go for it. If you find that it violates something that's a top 5, you better be daggone sure that it is so much of a win on the other fronts that that you can in good conscience violate one of your 5.
It's almost like what you're saying with that is in the priority list, number 1 is all 5 of them. Does it work with that? And then number 2 is the first one. And then number 3 down the list.
I've never heard anybody verbalize it that way, but I think that's very accurate that, the first one is just don't violate one of your top 5. And that's why, for me, there are, some of these tensions like that purpose with margin. In some senses, I'm cheating because I'm putting 2 into 1. But they are both really, really important to me. And I know that I do not want to violate that principle of having space in my life. That's why I do Space for Life and wrote a book. It truly is important to me. And I know that if I violate that, I'm going to pay a price for it. So, again, don't violate any of those top 5,
I think that's really helpful for me. And also, as I'm thinking through this, I think the categories themselves, I'm curious what you think, but I would argue that they're too broad. Where financial security, what are we saying with that? Are we saying that I want to have an emergency fund in the next couple months or next year, or I'm trying to have savings for my unborn child's education, or retirement? Or
You're absolutely right. And I would add that to exactly what we're talking about, that you want to create as much precision as possible if you want them to be meaningful and to really help you with the decision process. So, one of my guiding principle categories is family, all right, as it might be for you. But I had to ask myself, what is it about family that I really want to protect? So I had to think about how am I going to define that guiding principle in such a way that it will actually help me make decisions? What is it about family? Is it just being with them? Is it, I want my family to be the most highly educated family in the world. I want my family to always be able to argue well on issues. or I want my family to
Mm-hmm.
never argue. What is it
Mm-hmm.
about family that really matters to me? And when I could come down to that with some precision, then, okay,
Mm-hmm.
now I got something. Just like you said, financial security. What in the heck does that mean? Are we talking about, I want to be able to have my financial plan until I'm 99 years old, or, I want a rainy day fund of over $500 or something.
Right.
So again, that's part of the work, is to say, I need to define it precisely enough that it will help me make decisions.
And to me, that then navigates that tension that we're talking about. If the decision is, what do I invest in, this experience or financial security, that's overwhelming. But if I get more clarity on what financial security looks like for me in it, or a great example is experiences are very high on my list of priorities. But I look at it, and maybe this is right or wrong, but if I think about navigating the present and the future, I'm like, there's certain experiences that I can do now that I won't be able to do later. And they're really important. Not when I say, like, I would really like to experience those. There's certain trips and things that I could do at 70, 65, or 30.
Yeah.
And I feel less of a priority, and I'm willing to give up less for those than.
Right. Well, so for instance, a balance point might be for you, a guiding principle might be, I want to have as many life-giving experiences possible without sacrificing financial security for the future. Now, you would need to define financial security a little bit more, but now you've got something really clear when these opportunities come up. You've, number one, said, it's really important for me, and I want to have as many experiences as possible. That's defining right there. Okay, that tells you a lot about how you want to live. But you put a guardrail up with it to say, as long as it's not at the expense of. For instance, you might say, I want to have as many experiences as possible, as long as it's not at the expense of my family. Again, a guardrail goes up that helps you navigate something that you know is always a tension in your life. It's balancing experiences with X or whatever it is. And now, if you really craft that guiding principle well, it helps you tremendously decide about something, because you can say, it says yes to this, but it's saying no to this. And that no trumps this yes.
I'm agreeing and tracking most of the way with this. I think where my mind then goes, though, is when you then add the present versus the future. So if everything was in right now, that makes sense. But what if the decision is, what do I do this trip that, let's say it's $4,000, or do I take that $4,000 and invest in, I don't know, S&P 500 or a Roth IRA or whatever, and all of a sudden in 30 years, it's X amount, which could equal 3 trips. So is it one trip now or 3 trips in the future?
Then you sacrifice the experiences so that you can maximize your return later, thinking later I can have the experiences. But we don't have any guarantee about later. And if experiences are higher, not to the exclusion of financial security, then you take advantage of what you can take advantage of, as long as it's not violating that financial security. So the very statement of, well, if I put it away, I could have an experience, 20 years from now. That to me is right there saying, well, experiences aren't as important to you as financial security.
And what we were saying at the beginning, where it is training a behavior. Like, even if you do that and 20 years later is here and you have that opportunity, more often than not, we're training the behavior to choose finances over the experiences.
Oh, and let me tell you how many people I know that keep on putting off life decade after decade after decade until they finally get to a point where they can't enjoy life because they kept on putting it off, convinced that, the time would come later. And so, I even think biblically, we can't presume on the future. We can plan.
Right.
So So I'm completely with what you're saying. Now, let's make this a little simpler because I think some people might be getting their eyes crossed at this point. All of these things, and it's the beauty of this time of life that you're in, is a work in progress. And so my encouragement would be just get a good starting point on this. If you get a good starting point, but it's not just all massaged perfectly in terms of this balance of this versus this, then live your life. Use these, and then the more you use them, the more they're going to reveal or expose tensions that you want to get right. So, these guiding principles that I have come after a lot of decisions which revealed a tension. So, you talk about, let's say the one that I'm using as an example of living a life of purpose with margin, that came in its initial form of living a life of purpose. But then all of a sudden a decision came up that was really exciting. That was, living a life of purpose. But I realized something wasn't right about it. I realized that if I said yes to that, I was going to be getting myself in over my head. And I went, oh, that's because I know I'm violating this thing that matters to me. I don't want to live a life of purpose if it's going to be at the expense of this. And then all of a sudden, I now had a much more clarified guiding principle. But I evolved into that. It didn't come at first. So if you just started off with, okay, I've got these 5 things that really matter to me, and this one matters more than this, and this matters more than this, and I'm kind of, this gets it, and I need to give a little bit, I maybe need to give a lot more thought as to what financial security even means, but I got a good starting point. So let me start to live life, and that's going to start to clarify, what am I really meaning when I talk about financial security? And now I can get there.
I think that's really helpful and in a lot of ways reduces the pressure of the first time you sit down that you have to figure everything out. But then my one question with that is, let's say that you think experiences over financial security, and I know we're using the broad categories, but for the sake of this, let's assume that it's fleshed out way more than just that. But as time goes on, I keep realizing that it's hard for me to sacrifice the financial security category for the experience category, or I keep feeling this tension. At what point do I look at it and say that's a value misalignment, and I say this thing and I believe this thing's more important, so I need to invest in it? And at what point am I like, maybe I just had wishful thinking when I laid out my priorities, and this other thing actually is more of a priority?
Well, I think we want to try to align these things with honestly, not just what we want, but what we think God wants. So I think we want to align it with values that are who we want to become. And I think, let's just take the financial security, because it's such a rubbing point for everyone. Do we find ourselves a person who is always sacrificing financial security for the moment? And are we finding ourselves to be a person or a family that's never getting ahead? Or is the issue, we're doing fine, but we've got a greed thing going on? We're just trying to protect. So what are we really seeing when we look kind of under the hood on this? And so you talk about these people who are always putting things off, that should get exposed in this process, that, something's wrong, because I'm I'm never doing anything because everything is at the expense of financial security. And now this financial security thing has become a god for me. And that's not what I'm wanting on this. Now you've got room to just say, okay, I need to clarify this more. Financial security, but not at the expense of living my life fully for today. Something along those lines. So it takes a little bit of soul searching in this, but what I would want to say for you is that if you begin this process, then it's not too long before it becomes second nature. And all of this grinding that you're doing, trying to find it out now, is really worthwhile, because there's going to come the point in time when it will just make life so much simpler. When you've answered those questions about what financial security means and these balance points, then these decisions come along and it's really easy. And you find you're living a life that's aligned. And isn't that what we really want?
Right. And I think the part B of the, initial question was, how then do you have confidence living into it versus comparing or reacting? And I would assume it's a whole lot easier to have confidence with a life that begins to be aligned, or a life that you think is built around who I want to be and who I think God wants me to be, and the confidence around that, not just what do I want, what's the easy decision. Because I think that even if we do a great job getting clear on those priorities, it gets really hard when life happens and you have to make the decision of compromising something else or giving it up. And then you look around, and as much as you don't want to compare, it's a little bit natural. And I think whatever we can do to have more confidence in it gives us the best chance of living that life.
And it brings up something that I think is really important on, maybe a lot of the things that we talk about, and that's coming back to it regularly. So if I make a general practice, which I do, of looking at those guiding principles, every week, then it becomes very easy for me to take a look at that and go, yeah, that I'm living that way and feels really good. And all of a sudden, when life and death is not at stake, when a big decision's not on the table, and you've looked at these things, 5, 10, 20, 50, 100 times and gone, yeah, this is really working. Yeah. Then that builds that confidence around it. So, that confidence grows by keeping it in front of us and asking ourselves, is this working for me? Is this helping me define things the way I want to define them? Have I ever been in a situation where the right decision was against these? Because if it was, then something's wrong with the guiding principles. So you come back to it regularly and you build that confidence, and all of a sudden, it makes it effortless, believe it or not, a little bit down the road. Mm-hmm. So that's the place you're trying to get to, but you have to do a little bit of that initial hard work to get there. So if we simply begin by saying, okay, these are the 5 things that are the most important to me, and I've done a little bit of an inventory of other things that are important, and I'm fairly confident they are not more important than these 5 things, you had a great starting point.
And that effortlessness in so many ways is what I would argue I want most in this decade of, call it 25 to 35 or whatever, of how do I balance a freedom and living into this? And it's not like even a balance, but it's like a both and.
It's totally a both and, because the hard decisions in life always are a tension between some good things and deciding between them. So people have career decisions, they have family decisions, they have education decisions, they have decisions about where they live, that are not black and white decisions. It's not a decision between something that's good and bad. There are decisions between things that are all in this gray area. The more you can be clear about what is really the most important to you, the more those really hard, tough decisions are easier to make,
Mm-hmm. And that becomes the intentionality and living well that I think we at our core want in this decade, and the freedom that we also want. And that's kind of where the two of those collide and become one thing, not freedom versus intentionality.
Exactly. When we can get help with those big decisions because we have pre-decided what really matters to us, and then it enables us to go into those decisions freely with a sense of, I thought this through. I made the decision based on the best that I knew. Made this decision based on what I've said I really value. Now, it might not turn out, but it's not because I didn't make the decision the right way. So let me kind of add one more thing to this idea of guiding principles that is maybe my own bias to it, but it's something that I think is very important because it was very important. It was a core part of my early 30s, late 20s. So I think it's worth saying. And that's that in that list of guiding principles, I think it's very important for us to somehow address living a life of purpose. All right, now, what a life of purpose looks like for you or for the person next to you might be really different. But beginning to explore what brings meaning to your life is so very valuable. There's been study after study after study that has come through that says as long as we are living a life of purpose, we're living a good life. Now, that's going to be, I'm going to qualify that a little bit, because the one other thing that I think needs to be in that list of principles is relationships. And it might even be worth two things in there, but finding meaningful relationships, whether it's a spouse, whether it's good friends, finding people that matter to us and that are worth our living is so utterly important. And it was in my 20s that out of some of these thoughts, these musings, that I came to the decision that, I'm an introvert and I don't do friendships all that well, and that I needed to build friendships. And it was in those late 20s, early 30s that as a result of thinking about that I established a couple of friendships that have now gone on for 40 plus years. And those relationships have been some of the most important parts of life. But that did not come naturally for me. I had to actually work on it. I had to do uncomfortable things, but it was because I believed so much in the importance of that. So I guess as we go through and we've really talked broadly about these guiding principles, I would just say that as you develop them, something needs to be in there that is the core of what matters to you, relationally in your life. And maybe it's two things, but relationships are where life is found, and purpose is where life is found. So I really want to, add those into our discussion.
Well, I really appreciate what you're saying about relationships and purpose and finding the meaning, I would argue, kind of in life, in those things where, and in my short life experience, I think the danger can be you put experiences or you put career or you put finance or whatever it is in a priority, and there's nothing wrong with it being a priority, but and too easily that becomes then what we're searching for in meaning in life. Right. And those are going to not satisfy that. And then at the same time, it's going to increase the pressure of how to make the decision. Like if career feels so strong, and if I don't have this strong thing, I'm going to be lacking meaning and purpose in life, then like that makes the decision really hard and complicated. Whereas if we're able to look at what we think purpose is and relationships and really kind of set these on a different stage of like, this is where the true meaning in life is, then I think it frees us up sometimes with the other ones. It's like, I could say this is more important or this is more important, but like, does it really matter that much if I make one wrong decision here?
Yeah, you know? Well, there are two parts to it, because I think this is really critical. One is this is the decade, if we have not already figured it out, where we need to ask the question of what is the purpose of life broadly. You know, what really matters in life. And then it's also, at the same time, the decade we ask, what is the purpose of my life? So, I realize that it's not all about me. I'm a tiny piece in this massive world, and there is a purpose to life, which I believe is living for God, and a lot more to obviously be said about that I want my life to be in sync with. But I also believe God's called me individually, uniquely, to a certain life and to do certain things, and coming to an understanding of who God uniquely created me to be and what he's uniquely called me to do has been an incredible source of joy and significance in life. So that also fits in and is part of those guiding principles for me.
Well, this has been really helpful for me as I'm trying to figure out how to navigate all of these decisions and everything. And I guess, correct me if you disagree, but my takeaway in this is it's easy to look externally. How do I decide about these two things or whatever it is? And I think the challenge, I guess, of living well and living free in this decade comes from the internal work of who do I think I'm made to be? What do I think my purpose is? What do I value? What do I think God wants in my life? Or all of these internal questions then begin to paint a picture. And if that picture is not clear, it becomes increasingly hard to live well and live free. And the more clear that picture becomes for us, the more natural it is to live into that freedom.
Yeah. I think you're right on target, with a caveat that I would say. That is, we can make this whole thing of living our life into a mental exercise. We have decisions. We need to make the right decisions. We need to make the right choices. We need to live intentionally. And it all becomes about doing the right things and not doing the wrong things. That's all good and fine. I think the reality, though, is that our lives go in the direction of our habits in life. And we, yes, are going to hit critical points where there are decisions to make. But in the real long scheme of things, our life will be a reflection of the habits we have, for good or for bad. So let me use a crass analogy. If you have all of your guiding principles in place and you drink 2 bottles of wine every single night and build that habit, it ain't going to make a whole lot of difference that you're making good decisions because you've got a habit that's going to kill you. At the same time, if you build some core habits of wellness and faith and positive things in your life, then you almost can't help but live well. You know, if you take care of your body, if you create habits that build faith in your life, if you build habits that help you grow, like reading and learning as a habit that you practice every single day, then in the sense that will help mitigate a whole lot of bad decisions in your life. Because you're going to be constantly, those bad decisions will be coming off a trajectory that's going way up year after year after year. It's like saving some money is a habit, you know, more than it is a decision. You know, so I want to also, I guess, just maybe in a closing way, say that if we could reflect on the habits that are present in our life for good and for bad, and that maybe are important to begin. It's the 30s where we will create habits that will compound in a absolutely astounding way over decades to create the life that will create the life of aging well.
And I'm going to take a liberty here and correct me if you disagree, but I think this is where it can get a little dangerous, that there are many articles of here are the 10 habits you need to have in your 30s. This is what you need to do. And I don't think that's necessarily as much of what you're saying as in congruence with this mental exercise of figuring out what do we think matters in life and what our priorities are. Then how do we align our habits with that? Doesn't necessarily mean that you have to read or you need to not read, but it's what's this value? What's this priority? And then are you building that through a habit, or do you have a habit that's working in like opposites?
Yeah. Well, you're absolutely right. And it's a great kind of call out because, you know, having principles in your life is great, but if you have 50 of them, it's not going to help you too much. If you're spending your life trying to build the top 15, 20 habits, you probably won't build the important ones. So I use the phrase core habits, you know, and we only need a few core habits in our life. And if we do a few core habits well, the rest of it will take care of itself. Because we'll build some just because we're human, you know. But what are the core habits that are important to you and to most people to live well?
Well, I love what you said about that we're going to build them because we're human. I think it sounds on surface level like this is a recipe for burnout, just to add more stuff to your life, add this habit. But I would argue that we already have core habits.
Oh, yeah.
But more dangerous, they might be habits that are sabotaging us and they're unintentional. So it's just auditing what's there and trying to build what you want to be there instead.
Well, and to your point, you know, we want to simplify life. You know, and you've got, you know, a great decade, you know, ahead of you to enjoy and to live it up to the full. And you can't have your mind cluttered with 500 things. So a couple of core principles for your life, a couple of habits, then go live it up. You know, so don't get cluttered with 50 things that you're trying to keep track of and monitor, and 50 things that you've got to get right. You'll be exhausted before you're 31.